If you're over 65 and still driving the same way you have for years, 2026 could be the year you get fined, flagged, or even lose your license without ever realizing you broke a new rule. And the most dangerous part is this: many of these new driving rules don't feel new at all. They look like the same roads, the same signs, the same habits you've trusted for decades. But underneath the surface, the system has changed quietly, automatically, and in some cases permanently. Starting February 2026, multiple US states are rolling out enforcement rules that don't rely on warnings, discretion, or even direct police interaction. Cameras, algorithms, and insurance-linked databases are now doing the watching. That means you can be a careful driver, obey the speed limit most days, never touch your phone behind the wheel, and still end up paying hundreds or even thousands of dollars because of a single moment you didn't know was now illegal. This video is not about panic. It's about awareness. Because the drivers getting hit the hardest right now aren't reckless teenagers. They're experienced drivers who assumed the rules hadn't changed. Here's what makes 2026 different from every year before it. In the past, when driving laws changed, you usually heard about it. There were new stories, warning periods, and grace phases. In 2026, the shift isn't really about new laws. It's about new enforcement. The rules you think you understand are now being interpreted more aggressively, enforced more precisely, and punished more expensively than ever before. And for seniors, that matters more than for any other age group, because the consequences ripple further into insurance rates, license renewals, and even medical and identity reviews. Across the country, states are under pressure to improve road safety, recover infrastructure funding, and reduce liability. Their solution has been automation. Automated enforcement doesn't care how long you've been driving. It doesn't care about your clean record. It doesn't issue warnings. It doesn't explain itself. It simply records, reports, and forwards the violation, often directly to your insurance company or DMV file. And once that happens, fixing the mistake is no longer simple. Many drivers assume that if something were truly serious, they'd be notified clearly. But in 2026, notification often comes after the damage is done. A ticket in the mail, a registration renewal suddenly denied, an insurance bill that quietly jumps 25%. For seniors living on fixed incomes, these aren't minor inconveniences. They're budget-breaking surprises. And what's worse is that some of the most impactful changes are not happening nationwide. They're happening state by state, county by county. What's perfectly legal where you live may trigger a citation the moment you cross a state line. This is where most people get caught. They rely on what's always been true. They rely on experience. But experience no longer protects you when enforcement is automated. The system doesn't care that you've driven safely for 40 years. It only cares about what the camera sensor or database recorded in that moment. That's why so many drivers in early 2026 are saying the same thing. I didn't even know that was illegal. And that's exactly why this matters now, before February becomes March, before renewal notices arrive, before a simple errand turns into a financial headache. Because once a violation is logged, you can't talk your way out of it. You can't explain context to a camera. You can't appeal common sense to an algorithm. Prevention is the only real protection left. Over the next part of this video, I'm going to walk you through the most important driving rule changes taking effect in 2026, with special attention to how they affect seniors age 65 and older. Not rumors, not speculation. These are enforcement policies already approved, funded, and in many cases already active. Some of them are genuinely about safety, others are about efficiency and revenue. But all of them share one thing in common: they punish drivers who aren't paying very close attention. You'll learn which everyday habits are now considered violations, how insurance companies are being notified faster than ever, why license renewals are becoming more strict for older drivers, and which small, inexpensive adjustments can save you thousands of dollars over the next few years. Most importantly, you'll know exactly what to watch for so you don't become one of the drivers learning these rules the hard way. And coming up next, we're starting with the change that is already catching more drivers than any other in early 2026. It doesn't involve speeding. It doesn't involve alcohol. And it doesn't require an accident. In fact, many drivers don't even realize they've done anything wrong until the ticket arrives. Distracted driving is no longer being treated as a secondary issue. For years, many states followed what was called secondary enforcement. That meant an officer couldn't pull you over just for holding your phone. They needed another reason first. Maybe a broken taillight or rolling through a stop sign. That layer of protection is disappearing. As 2026 rolls in, more than a dozen additional states have officially moved to primary enforcement, and even states that already had hands-free laws are now enforcing them far more aggressively. What that means in real life is simple and uncomfortable. If an officer sees a phone in your hand, or even sees the glow of a screen on your lap at night, that alone is now enough to justify a traffic stop. No speeding, no swerving, no warning. And in several states, enforcement guidance has expanded what counts as use. It's no longer just texting while driving, holding your phone to check directions, scrolling a playlist while stopped at a red light, tapping a screen to dismiss a notification while traffic is paused. All of that can now qualify as distracted driving under updated definitions being enforced in 2026. This is where many experienced drivers get tripped up. For decades, stopping at a red light felt like a safe pause. You weren't moving, so you weren't really driving. But the law no longer sees it that way. If you're in the driver's seat in control of the vehicle and your phone is in your hand, you're considered actively operating the car, even if your foot is on the brake. That single assumption has changed the legal landscape, and the penalties are no longer symbolic. We're not talking about a small fine that you grumble about and move on from. First-time citations in many jurisdictions are now landing in the $200 to $500 range. And that's before court fees or administrative search charges. But the ticket itself isn't the real problem. The real damage shows up quietly later when your insurance renews. Insurance companies now treat distracted driving as a high-risk behavior, similar to speeding or at-fault accidents. Industry data shows that a single distracted driving citation can raise your premiums anywhere from 15 to 30%. And that increase often sticks around for 3 to 5 years. If you're paying around $2,500 a year for auto insurance, that's an extra $225 to $450 every year over time. One quick glance at a phone can cost well over $1,000, and that's assuming nothing else happens. For seniors, this hits harder. Many older drivers already pay higher premiums simply because of age-based risk models. A distracted driving mark on your record compounds that effect, and unlike some minor violations, distracted driving citations are rarely forgiven or removed early. Once it's on your record, it's there. What's especially frustrating is that many of these violations are completely preventable with very small changes. If your car doesn't have built-in Bluetooth or voice controls, this is the year to stop improvising. A simple dashboard or vent mount that keeps your phone out of your hands costs less than a single tank of gas. Most modern smartphones can make calls, read texts aloud, and provide turn-by-turn navigation without you touching the screen at all. It takes a little adjustment, but it's far cheaper than the alternative. Another important adjustment is habit-based. If you're stopped at a light, train yourself to treat that moment as still driving. Hands on the wheel, eyes forward, phone untouched. That mindset shift alone can eliminate the most common distracted driving citations now being issued. Because enforcement officers aren't just looking for reckless behavior anymore. They're looking for technical compliance. And in 2026, technical violations are are costing real money. This change is already active in many states, and more are joining every month, which means even if you haven't been ticketed yet, the odds are rising. And as uncomfortable as this sounds, distracted driving enforcement is only the beginning, because the next change doesn't involve police officers at all. And once it's in place, there's no discretion, no warning, and no conversation. If you think speed limits are enforced the same way they were 5 years ago, the next part is where things get serious. The next enforcement shift is one that many drivers assume doesn't apply to them until it does. Automated speed enforcement has existed for years, but in 2026, it's entering a completely different phase. This is no longer about a few fixed cameras near busy intersections. States are now rolling out AI-powered speed monitoring systems, especially in construction zones, and they are designed to operate with precision that leaves no room for error or explanation. In states like Michigan, these systems are already active in work zones across major highways. The cameras are paired with radar and timing software that measures your speed the moment you enter the zone and tracks it continuously as you pass through. If workers are present and you exceed the posted limit, even by a small margin, the system records your vehicle, your speed, and your license plate. There's no officer making a judgment call, no warning wave, no pulling you over on the shoulder. The citation arrives later, quietly by mail. What makes this especially dangerous for experienced drivers is how these zones operate. The cameras are only active when workers are present, which sounds reasonable, but many drivers don't realize how narrowly that condition is defined. A single worker standing behind a barrier is enough to activate the system. Temporary signs may not look different from inactive zones you've driven through dozens of times before. And because many of these zones shift locations week to week, relying on memory is no longer reliable. The penalty structure is also designed to escalate. In some states, the first violation is issued as a warning, which gives drivers a false sense of security. The second offense often triggers a civil fine around $150. The third can jump to $300 or more. While some states currently classify these as non-moving violations without license points, others are already sharing the data directly with insurance companies. That means even if your license isn't affected, your premiums may be. For seniors, this creates a quiet financial risk. You may never interact with law enforcement. You may never step into a courtroom. But your insurance provider sees a pattern of speed-related enforcement, and your rates adjust accordingly. And unlike traditional tickets, there's very little opportunity to contest these violations successfully. The system logs the speed. The speed exceeded the limit. The case is closed. The safest approach in 2026 is to treat every construction zone as absolute. If the sign says 45, you drive 45, not 50. Not keeping up with traffic, not just passing through. These systems are calibrated for exact thresholds, and the margin that once existed has disappeared. But construction zones are only part of the story. Cities and school districts are expanding automated enforcement into areas where drivers least expect it, and the rules change based on the clock, not the road. School zone speed cameras are spreading rapidly across states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and others. These are not always obvious, and they don't operate the way traditional speed cameras do. Instead of being active all day, they're tied directly to school schedules. Typically, the cameras turn on 30 minutes before school starts and remain active until 30 minutes after the final bell. The same applies in the afternoon during dismissal. During those windows, speed limits often drop dramatically, sometimes to 15 or 20 miles an hour. If you exceed that reduced limit by as little as 10 miles per hour, the camera captures your plate and a citation is issued. No flashing lights, no immediate feedback. Many drivers don't realize they've been cited until the letter arrives days later. The most common complaint from drivers is confusion. They say they didn't see the sign. They entered the zone just as it became active. They were slowing down, but hadn't reached the reduced speed yet. Unfortunately, courts have consistently ruled that drivers are responsible for knowing when school zones are active and adjusting immediately. The enforcement systems are legally upheld, and appeals rarely succeed unless there's a clear technical error. Fines vary, but first offenses often range from $50 to $250. That may not sound catastrophic, but just like with distracted driving, the secondary effects matter. Multiple citations in school zones raise red flags with insurers, and because these violations are camera-based, they accumulate faster than traditional stops. You don't get a warning conversation, you just get a record. There are practical ways to reduce your risk. Navigation apps like Google Maps and Waze are increasingly marking school zones and known camera locations based on user reports and municipal data. These alerts aren't a license to speed. They're reminders to heighten awareness. When you hear that alert, it's your cue to scan for signage, check your speed, and assume enforcement is active. Another important habit is time awareness. If you regularly drive through residential areas in the morning or afternoon, build a mental buffer into your routine. Assume school zones are active during typical start and dismissal times, even if you don't see children present. The system doesn't care whether kids are visible. It only cares whether the time window is open. What's happening here is a broader shift away from discretionary enforcement and toward automated compliance. The system is no longer asking whether you intended to break the rule. It's asking whether the rule was technically broken. And in 2026, that distinction matters more than ever. And as uncomfortable as these camera systems are, the next change goes even deeper. It doesn't rely on cameras or speed at all. It redefines what it means to be legally sober behind the wheel. And it shrinks the margin so much that many social drivers won't realize they've crossed it until it's too late. For decades, drivers across the United States grew up with one number burned into their memory. Euro 8, that was the legal line. Stay under it, and you were considered sober. Cross it, and you were in serious trouble. In 2026, that assumption is no longer safe. A quiet but powerful shift is underway, and it's one of the most consequential changes on the road this decade. Several states are moving toward a lower legal blood alcohol concentration, and the margin for error is shrinking to almost nothing. This change is modeled after what's known as the Utah approach. Years ago, Utah lowered its legal BAC limit from 0.08 to 0.05, and the results caught national attention. Fatal crashes involving drivers with alcohol in their system dropped significantly. Safety advocates praised the outcome, and now other states are following. Legislators in places like Washington, New York, and Hawaii are actively pushing similar reductions, and some jurisdictions are already enforcing stricter interpretations under existing laws. Here's why this matters so much, especially for older drivers. A BAC of 0.0505 doesn't feel drunk to most people. It can be a beer with dinner, a glass of wine at a restaurant, 2 drinks over a couple of hours at a family gathering. Many drivers would have confidently driven home under those circumstances for years without issue. In 2026, that confidence can put you at serious legal risk. Alcohol affects people differently as they age. Metabolism slows, medications interact, body composition changes. A drink that once had minimal effect may now raise your BC faster and keep it elevated longer. And the estimates people rely on, weight charts, drink counts, timing rules, are unreliable at best. 2 people can drink the same amount and end up with very different BAC readings. What makes this shift especially dangerous is that the penalties haven't softened just because the limit is lower. In states adopting or enforcing the 0.055 standard, the consequences look almost identical to traditional DUI penalties. We're talking about immediate license suspension, mandatory ignition interlock devices, even for first-time offenders, fines that can range from $500 to $2,000, required alcohol education programs, possible jail time, and insurance premiums that skyrocket for years. The law treats crossing 0.05 the same way it once treated crossing 0.08. There is no longer a safe mental calculation you can rely on, no formula that guarantees you're okay to drive. And for seniors, the stakes are even higher. A DUI can trigger additional scrutiny during license renewal. It can raise red flags with insurers. It can even affect employment for those who still work or volunteer in roles that require driving. The safest rule in 2026 is also the simplest. If you plan to drink at all, don't drive. Arrange transportation before the first drink. Use rideshare services. Ask a family member. Stay the night. The cost of a ride home is always less than the cost of a DUI, both financially and personally. If you find this kind of explanation helpful, and you want to stay ahead of changes like this as they roll out, make sure you're subscribed. These rules are evolving quickly, and staying informed is becoming just as important as driving carefully. Now let's shift gears to a change that's hitting wallets in a different way, especially for drivers who thought they were getting ahead by switching to electric vehicles. For years, EV owners enjoyed lower operating costs, tax incentives, and the feeling that they were opting out of traditional fuel-based expenses. In 2026, that free ride is officially ending across most of the country. The reason is straightforward, even if it's frustrating. For nearly a century, roads in the United States have been funded primarily through gas taxes. Every time you filled up, part of what you paid went toward maintaining highways, bridges, and infrastructure. Electric vehicles don't use gas, which means EV drivers weren't contributing to that system, even though they use the same roads. As EV adoption increased, states started facing funding gaps. Their solution is new annual fees for electric vehicles. By January 2026, more than 40 states have implemented some form of EV road use fee. These aren't hypothetical. They're already showing up on registration renewal notices. The amounts vary, but many fall between $100 and $200 per year. Some states are using sliding scales tied to the vehicle's original price or age. Others are locking in fee increases that rise every year. In states like New Jersey, the fee increases automatically. In Pennsylvania, EV fees have already jumped significantly. For owners of newer or higher-end electric vehicles, the annual cost can approach $250 or more. When states explain these fees, they often point out that the average gas-powered driver pays even more in fuel taxes over the course of a year. And mathematically, that's often true. But for EV owners, this still feels like a surprise expense, especially for seniors on fixed incomes who budget carefully. What matters isn't the fairness debate. What matters is knowing the fee exists so it doesn't blindside you. And there's another layer to this that affects everyone, not just EV drivers. Several states are using 2026 as a testing ground for mileage-based road usage charges. Instead of taxing fuel, they're experimenting with taxing distance. The more you drive, the more you pay. These programs are still being piloted, but they signal a long-term shift away from gas taxes altogether. Some versions rely on self-reported mileage. Others use onboard devices or telematics. The idea is to charge drivers per mile, regardless of whether their car is electric or gas-powered. While these programs are currently optional or limited, the direction is clear. Distance-based taxation is coming, and once it's standardized, driving habits could directly affect annual costs in ways most people aren't used to tracking. The most important takeaway here is awareness. Check your registration renewal carefully. Read every line. Fees that didn't exist last year may now be mandatory. If you're considering buying an electric vehicle, factor these annual costs into your decision. And if your state offers mileage programs, understand how they work before enrolling. Ignoring them won't stop them from expanding. Because as you're about to hear next, the system in 2026 isn't just watching how fast you drive or how much you drink. In some states, it's now prepared to take your vehicle away on the spot. No second chances, no warnings, and no easy way to undo it. This next change is where the law stops being abstract and starts getting physical. In several states, 2026 marks a major expansion of what qualifies as reckless driving, and the consequences go far beyond a ticket. Law enforcement agencies are now being given broader authority to seize vehicles immediately if certain behaviors are observed, even if no one is injured and no accident occurs. What used to be written up as exhibition of speed or careless driving is now being classified as something much more serious. Actions like spinning tires, drifting in an empty parking lot, accelerating aggressively from a stop, or participating in informal street gatherings can now trigger on-the-spot vehicle impoundment. In some states, the officer doesn't need to prove racing. They only need to determine that the driving behavior was intentional and unsafe under the expanded definition. Here's what that means in real life. States are reworking how senior drivers are evaluated, and while some long-standing requirements are being relaxed, others are becoming stricter and more procedural. For years, certain states required mandatory behind-the-wheel road tests, starting at a relatively early senior age. That policy faced increasing criticism as data showed that older drivers as a group tend to be more cautious, less aggressive, and less likely to commit moving violations. In response, several states have raised the age at which mandatory road tests begin. In some cases, drivers may not be required to retest until their late 70s or even 80s. On the surface, this sounds like a win, and in many ways, it is. It reduces unnecessary stress and acknowledges the reality that age alone doesn't determine driving ability. But at the same time, states are tightening other aspects of the renewal process, especially vision and in-person verification requirements. If this breakdown helped you understand what's changing and why it matters, consider sharing it with someone who drives regularly, especially a senior or a young driver in your family. And if you'd like to stay informed as these rules continue to evolve, keep an eye out for future updates. Driving laws don't stand still anymore, and staying informed is now part of staying safe. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Drive carefully, stay aware, and protect what matters.